Well, welcome to another edition of What's So Funny, the show that probes the brains, the minds, the psyches, and the brains of the people who make the funny. Irwin Barker's recent passing got me thinking about his comedy, notably his bit on dried fruit, which then got me thinking about the strange things we do with human bodies, burying, cremation, mummification, freeze-drying, etc. And if that's in bad taste, well, blame tonight's guest, the late, great Irwin Barker. And now a man whose first thought when he heard of Irwin's death was, great, now I don't need to find a guest for the show. I can just do a tribute to Irwin. Your host and MC, Mr. Guy McPherson.
Yeah, I should probably pre-approve your introductions, Kevin. But, hey, it's part of your charm.
That's right.
Yeah, it was a sad week for Canadian comedy as Irwin Barker finally lost his 3-year battle with cancer. The whole country felt it because Irwin was one of the few performers every region of Canada could claim. He first went on stage in Winnipeg. He got serious with stand-up in Vancouver for 10 years, beginning in 1995. Lived half the year in Halifax when he became a staff writer for This Hour Has 22 Minutes. And finally made Toronto his home while working on the Rick Mercer Report. But there was no doubt in Irwin's mind where he identified most with, as he told us on his second visit to the show back in 2008. You're such a great comic. You're a Toronto comic now. That just doesn't sound right.
I'm a Vancouver comic who lives in Toronto.
Okay, that's better. Because if a war breaks out between Vancouver and Toronto comics, which side are you going to be on?
I don't know. I'll have to get on the train and come back, I guess.
So there you have it, Irwin Barker, a Vancouver comedian. Let it be noted from the man himself. Irwin Barker guested on this show twice, first in 2005 and again in 2008. This hour we're going to play clips from both those programs and we'll give you some of Irwin's comedy too. Hilariously dry on stage, Irwin could be just dry when talking about the art form he loved, but always insightful and illuminating on the subject. So here's a selection of clips, first up, of Irwin talking about clean and intelligent comedy.
We're talking about the clean comedy and the refusal to go dirty and all of that stuff. It's not so much that I have anything against dirty comedy all that much in the clubs. It's really funny, and a lot of my friends do. Mm-hmm. But it just doesn't work for my character. That's part of it.
Right.
And then I get a lot of times I'm asked to speak at conferences and that sort of thing. And then in that context, the tendency is to want to go clean. They usually want somebody to go clean. And even comics who do sometimes go a little bit dirty when they're in that situation, they'll tone down a little bit. And,
that's right. Yeah. Or when they do a showcase, and it's for TV, they got to take out the swearing. And a lot of times I find it actually works better. Not always, but
yeah, I mean,
because there's a lot of unnecessary or perfunctory curse words.
Yeah, we rely on it. People think because it has a shock value.
Yeah.
The problem is, so many people do it nowadays, and there's so much of it on television and all that it doesn't have the same valence as it once had years ago. And you'd swear at a crowd, and it would get a huge laugh because it's not the kind of thing that people would say in public. And now it's so common that it loses that. So,
would you say it's easier to be a dirty comic?
Probably, it's easier. You get more laughs from the crowd, and also, interestingly enough, sexual humor is easier to write, and one of the reasons for that is the language pool is so large for sexual function and for parts of the sexual anatomy that the ability to create some sort of hidden similarity between something sexual and something else is just a lot more available because of the large language pool that we have for things that are sexual. That's all. You just think of how many synonyms there are for different parts of the sexual anatomy,
right.
And then the ability to then draw a comparison between that and something else is there. So it's easier to write sexual humor just for no other reason than that the language pool is there. And with the younger comics as well, sex is something that's a lot more present in their minds.
Right.
So, and we draw.
Are you saying it's not present in your mind?
I'm too old for that now.
Oh, come on! I see you on the town all the time.
Yeah.
You do your act, and it's clean, and nobody even really notices. Like, it doesn't matter what the crowd is, right?
Well, often they don't notice till the end, and they go, "Hey."
Yeah, because it's funny. And yet, there's one bit you do about Starbucks where they don't have the correct size cup.
Yeah.
And you throw out the F-bomb.
I did, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's when people go, "Oh my God!"
Because it's out of character.
It's out of character, and it works. But when you're just throwing them out liberally,
willy nilly,
I say,
yeah. Then basically, if I did all the way through swear, then that particular joke wouldn't work that well because it wouldn't have the same impact that it has otherwise. I'm just trying to describe the frustration of why someone's so concerned about something so trivial.
And when you write that joke, are you thinking, yes, I can put it in here because I don't do it? Or were you worried about it? Should I actually swear here or not?
I did. I tried it a couple of times without that just to see how it would work. And it doesn't have the punch that it requires.
So, yeah, there are situations. It's funny. I had the opportunity of interviewing Bob Newhart a few years ago, and one of his favorite comics, strangely enough, is Richard Pryor. And like you said right now, a lot of your friends comics you admire do swear a lot. Sure. And Bob Newhart, he goes, I don't care if other people do it if they're funny, but it doesn't work for me, just like what you said.
Yeah, and then it's also the distinction that needs to be made between swearing a lot and comedy that has a sexual content to it. And when we talk about clean comedy, usually we mean both of those things, but it's good to make a distinction between the two. Because, I mean, it's possible sometimes to talk about something that's of a sexual nature without it really being all that dirty, if that makes sense.
Yes.
But part of it is what I call using an up transformation, bringing it up out of the toilet as opposed to taking some concept and dragging it down there.
So you take a base subject and you elevate it somehow?
I can.
Through language?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I did I don't do it often, but I did a joke about the sexually suggestive names in drinks, and how, but doing it from my own confused analytical frame of mind about how that must be a marketing kind of thing because everyone loves whatever it is,
Sex on the beach.
Sex on the beach.
Slippery nipples.
Although, the sex on the beach, unless you happen to run across it at Stanley Park and it's not quite what you expected.
Right.
But I mean, you can talk about it without it, but bringing it up. I talk about how they have a drink called the blowjob. How they must name it that because it's everyone likes that. Everyone, it seems to be something everyone wants.
Right. Yeah.
So if I was an international diplomat, even it could be my ace up the sleeve. When they're arguing, we have nothing in common with you. We're Arabs, you're Jews. Hey, but you like a blowjob, right, guys? And they're all hugging each other. Okay, because I brought the Kahlua with me. You can have one.
Peace in the Middle East. That's some pretty arcane references too. Last night you mentioned Euclid, and one person went Euclid.
Yeah. It's for one person. Yeah, joking about Pythagoras cutting across someone's lawn, right? Because he can prove that it's shorter. That's. But and then the neighbor saying, "Well, go the long way because I planted olives there already." It's just silly. It's just because no one thinks about the practical application of Pythagoras thinking, "Wait a minute, figures it out. This is from now on. I'm cutting across the lawn because it's shorter. I figured it out. The square of this is equal to the sum of the square of that, and oh man, I could be saving myself 12 steps a day here."
Do you throw things out there to gauge the intelligence of the crowd?
Yeah.
And then react accordingly?
Yeah, sometimes. And even if they don't get it right away, it's a good idea to make the crowd think, okay, hang on, I gotta get my thinking cap on here, This isn't going to be just spoon-fed. And then you get a joke and, you compliment them for getting it sometimes. I don't like stand-ups who do what I call a really intelligent comedy, or what we call really intelligent comedy, and do it in an arrogant way. I don't know if you've seen that. they'll say a joke and then they'll be like, well, obviously this is way over everyone's head here, you know, like you guys are boneheads, kind of, because it's very unlikable characteristic to make people feel stupid. So the trick of doing intelligent comedy is, how do you do intelligent comedy to a crowd that may not get it, but at the same time make them feel smart for what they do get, you know? There's a lot of layers to the joke, so when they get the joke, say, well, you guys are sharp, you're a smart crowd, I like that, you know? That's what I like about Vancouver, and something like that, you know, just to help people feel better about themselves.
Yeah, about those arrogant comics. Sometimes I'm sitting there going, no, I get it. It just wasn't funny. You didn't deliver it well, or it's not a well-crafted joke.
Yeah. They'll say a joke with an obscure reference sometimes. And then go, oh, for crying out loud, read a book, you people. You know, like they do that. And it's like, no, that's an obscure reference, you know. You don't expect everyone in the crowd to know who that was.
Euclid.
Yeah, or who Euclid is. I'm not going to go, oh, come on, Euclid. Read a book, folks. Read a geometry text. If they don't know who Pythagoras is, that's fine with me. I mean, I'm not going to sit there and go, you know, call them down for it.
You're never worried about talking over their heads, dumbing down your material.
No, I know that. I'll dumb down stuff a little bit sometimes, without trying to sound like I'm doing it. I'll say, like, if I have to mention somebody, and I'm afraid they might not know. Say I'm saying John Baird, who's the Environment Minister. I don't want to say John Baird, the Environment Minister, so I sound like you guys didn't know that, you know.
Right.
So I'd say, and John Baird, who, you know, as we all know, Environment Minister now, you know, like they moved him to Environment Minister, you know. Why would they do that, you know? Like that sort of thing. So I'm just commenting on it, like we all know he's that.
Sure.
You know, so you give people the benefit of the doubt all the time. That's part of helping people feel smart and feel good about themselves.
Well, who is the Premier of Alberta?
Ed Stelmach.
Okay, you mentioned him last night without saying he's the Premier of Alberta, but I could piece it together. I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah, that's right, yeah.
So there's an example of just saying it.
They lost all their funding under Ed Stelmach now. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, without explaining it. That's good. And another joke of yours last night that you did, you had an argument over someone about the meaning of semantics.
The meaning of the word semantics.
That's right. And then you had one person laugh. And,
one person laughs. One guy gets it, and it's...
You know, it's a Friday late show. People have been drinking, and maybe
they
they don't think. But that's just great. It's like a little reward there for people who are listening and know it.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. And it's too complicated to explain that, and explaining it wouldn't do anyone any good. If you missed that joke, you missed it, you know? There's no saving that joke by explaining it.
Yeah, and there's always more to come. It's not like we have to wait long before a laugh.
Yeah, they don't get that when there's another joke right on its heels that's a lot easier to get, you know? Well, it's an incongruence, which is the kind of the key to what humor is all about. And it's like, how can someone be so intelligent and so confused at the same time? You know, in mind, that's the incongruence that throughout the whole act I'm trying to convey, that kind of conflict within my character. If your character on stage has something, see, to me, the comedian, besides being funny, they need to be interesting as well. And part of what makes them interesting is if there's some kind of contradiction within their character that way, and also just out of the language that they use, the way they choose to communicate, they can be more interesting. I remember talking to one comic one time and telling him he shouldn't say masturbate, you know, and he was going, oh, why, because you're all clean? And I said, no, that's because that's what everybody calls it. You know, you're a comedian, call it something funny.
And did he?
No, but, you know, maybe at home when he does it, I don't know. He calls it something else. I'd love to get on a show where I could use some of this trivial knowledge that I pick up every once in a while to help me in my comedy writing, and put it to win on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, or you ever watched Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? Try to figure out how come it takes so long for them to answer the simplest questions in the world. Yeah? Meredith's up there. She's like, now what is the primary ingredient in toast? Is it A, carbon, B, yeast, C, bread, or D, jam? You guys got to think about it. Boy, oh boy, you got me there. Well, it's not jam, obviously, because you put jam on toast. Meredith, I remember when I was a kid, we'd get up in the morning and we'd brush our teeth and we'd head downstairs. We'd put dried cereal in a bowl, and then we'd sprinkle some sugar on that, and we'd pour milk over it, and we'd eat that with a spoon. And while we were doing that, my mother would make toast. So I'd like to call my mother.
The great Irwin Barker, who died last Monday at the age of 58. He had a reputation for being one of the best joke writers in the business, the end result being a seemingly endless string of jokes on a rather pedestrian topic. He explained his analytical style and his theory of the rake to us.
I think I called it analytical as opposed to, because so much was observational. There was that move from victim-oriented old-style humor and became more non-symmetrical, more observational, just things about life that are common to everyone. And when I was trying to develop a style, I was calling it analytical just because I like to take an idea and kind of beat it to death,
Yeah.
And go a long ways with one.
With grapes.
With raisins.
Raisins, yeah. Sorry, raisins.
Or grapes. I could do grapes.
Could you give me 20 minutes on grapes?
Oh, yeah. I find something funny in trying to find a whole bunch of different angles about something to the point where the audience is going, how long is he going to go on about this? Because you just keep finding, like the raisins was a good example. I was joking about getting all these raisins at Costco, and then I started making jokes about raisins, and that came out of a challenge one time of whether you can joke about something that's banal, or as opposed to something that's meaningful, because it's like the theory is that, like, does comedy try to get a hold of the things that we fear a lot, and is that where its bite is, and like in flying in an airplane or a dentist or dogs, big mean dogs, or those kinds of things can be kind of inherently funny. Is there something, can you take something banal, unthreatening, unfunny, and just make it funny? And so I picked raisins.
How did you pick raisins?
I don't know.
You don't remember that?
Well, partly is because I had the joke about going to Costco, and I closed it off by saying the problem with Costco is that it's just you got to choose, and so for $145, I've got enough raisins now to last me the rest of my life, and that was the joke. And then so I started just decided, I'll just make some jokes about raisins, and so I looked up raisins, and I got all kinds of information about them, and there's way more information about raisins than I have in my jokes about it too.
And you have a lot of information in your jokes about it.
There used to be, I found this out back in Egypt, like I said, where they were invented in Egypt about 4,000 years ago. But at the time, raisins were included among the things that you could use to pay your taxes. And
seriously,
yeah, livestock. There's certain products that were you were allowed to use to pay your taxes, and raisins was included for all the countries and people who were under Egypt's rule and had to pay taxes. They could pay in grain, livestock, goats, etc. And raisins was one of the things they could. So this is more jokes there, maybe around tax time, talking about how that would be really great for me. I'd be set, just a big box of raisins, send down to Revenue Canada and tell them to fill their boots.
Is it risky doing the history of raisins, for example, which isn't inherently funny,
no,
but because of the context, it's hilarious? I mean, especially I'd imagine in a club with a lot of younger people, drinkers, and you're really giving the history of raisins.
Yeah, they're a little bit high, and so it seems weird, talk about something as as harmless as raisins. Like, they're like, how long is this guy going to go on talking about raisins? You know, and finding a different angle each time. You know, because they talk about how dried grapes are called raisins and why, and same with plums, dried plums, prunes, and then dried apricot. Like, at which point was it there were the people working on the language said this, we can't be doing this all the time, changing the name of something just because it's being set out on the shelf and you know, dried whatever it is. That's what we got to go that way. You know, the dictionary is going to get out of control eventually. Yeah, I have a tendency to beat something to death, you know, and let just let it go on and on for a while.
And are you critical, or do you think less of younger comics when you see them? Well, there's so much potential to a premise, and then they let it go after one punchline.
I might suggest like a tag to them or something every once in a while, or it's whether they feel like they don't want to bore people with sticking with one topic too long. But it's actually it's the stepping on the rake concept, and you know, when you step on a rake and it's funny, and then you do it again, and the third time it's not so funny, and then the fourth time and fifth time it's like. And then about the seventh time, it's hilarious again. You got to have the patience to plow through that and get it back to hilarious. And because people are going to be funny. Okay, I'm getting tired of it now. All right. Okay, again. No more. 6, 7. Okay, and then they're laughing again at it.
Because it's so absurd.
Yeah, and because the question is, how many times can this person keep plausibly stepping on the rake? You know, it's not like they're just going over and deliberately stepping on it each time. It's like every single time it looks like an accident, you know, or they accidentally stumble on it. And that seems to be the key to, you're not forcing those. They're just naturally coming out. It's just like your next thought happens to be something else about, they think you're done with the raisins, and then you come up with something else about them.
The latest one I heard you exhausting a topic on was pee. I hadn't heard that one before.
Oh yeah. Oh, that was silly. Oh yeah, that was the other. Just because you were something about an article, not an article. Sorry, a personal ad in the and some guy looking for someone to pee on him. Yeah, and for some reason I went to town on that. What life must be like. I was trying to normalize it. That was the comedic device. I was trying to think, okay, let's just say that's what people do. Now let's normalize it. Do they have the same discussions? Do they have foreplay? You know, like, oh, I had way too much coffee today, you know, and there are arguments. You never touched your water, obviously, you know, you're not even thinking about me, you know. Yeah. You know, so I just tried to, like, what would it sound like for them in the context of that being their life, like what their arguments, what their language would be like. So it really was language jokes to me. But
how do you know when you're finished a topic?
I know. It was.
I mean, in the writing process, when you go, okay, I've had enough on this topic, because as you said, even with the raisins, there's more that you could do.
Yeah. Sometimes it just kind of feels like a nice, neat knot, or it just kind of goes into some other topic kind of neatly.
The professor. So how did he do it? What was his process? Naturally, Irwin Barker took an analytical approach in the writing process as well.
Well, there's a style of creative thinking that is like, I have a joke. Here's an example. I have a joke about where I say, you know, if you lose something, you know, I won't do the whole thing, but there's a part of it at the end where I say, when you find it, you always get some person going, oh, it's always the last place you look, eh? Mm-hmm. And in a way, that's when people stop looking, when they found what they're looking for. But the comedic mind doesn't work that way. The comedic mind is, well, since I'm looking, I'm just going to keep digging around and see what else there is out here. So we don't necessarily stop when the the logical side of the brain finds the answer that it likes, because the logical side says, okay, that's good, we found it, thanks. But the other side of the brain, the right side of the brain that explores and looks around for ideas and theories and explanations, can keep looking, keep trying to find something else, is trying to see if there's another way of looking at something, or if there's a little door to some other thought that's in there. So my tendency is to keep looking after I've already found something. So
that's why you can go for 10 minutes on a subject that nobody else could do it.
Well, just, yeah, because I like to just keep trying to explore it.
Yeah.
Even after I found what I'm initially looking for, that doesn't mean that there isn't something else there. So keep looking. I've seen some books on creative exercises and that type of thing. And what I've been trying to do is I look at books on topics that are related to comedy, but not really related, like books on scientific thinking and all of that sort of thing.
How is that related to comedy?
Well, the scientists who stop when they reach a conclusion that's based on a paradigm have stopped the creative process at the point where everyone else has reached the same conclusion. So they're closing the door on discovery by doing that. And similarly with, you're never going to find the joke when the logical response comes to mind, you know. And one of the interesting things about being human is that we're always trying to create causal chains. You know, we're always looking at. You ever look across the street and say a lady stumbles or something like that? None of my business that she stumbled, and yet in your head you're going, "Oh man, I wonder if she's drunk, or maybe there's a crack on the sidewalk, or she's wearing high heels." I guess that, you know, I mean, like, why are we thinking that? And, you know, and all of a sudden a guy stumbles at the same spot, and then all of a sudden you start putting this theory together. Well, it's all while you're waiting for the bus, you know. Oh, there must be a pothole there or something, you know. And then a third person stumbles, and you're thinking, oh, maybe it's me. I don't know. I'm creeping people out. I'm staring at them. That's it, making people fall, you know. But we have a natural tendency to want to create causal links. And it's all to do with, you know, congruence theory and all of that sort of stuff, or dissonance theory. But once we've created that, once we're satisfied, okay, there's a pothole there, you know, now we're happy. Then we stop looking, right? Because we can get on the bus and go. We don't have to be worried about it anymore. But the comedic mind just keeps exploring, keeps looking around, and keeps. And always says there's got to be another way of looking at why X necessarily leads to Y. You know, maybe there's a circuitous route around it that is funny. And sometimes the jokes just automatically come to you. And then sometimes you've just got to look at something for a while and say, okay, now if somebody says you have to write a joke on this topic or whatever it is, then yeah, you'll sit down and actually get a joke out of it after a while when there's nothing there to begin with.
You are known as one of the best writers in stand-up. All comedians admire that, but relatively few practice it, I find. Do you think it's because they're incapable or lazy?
I'd hate to say that, but
well, we're speaking generically, so you know.
Generically,
yeah.
I think a lot of comedians, if I'm talking to young comedians, I think they need to read more. A lot of their comedy comes out of you know, their own experiences on the road and stuff like that. And
they do say write what you know.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea to read, just to read a little bit more, give you a little bit more flexibility with the language, and just bring you into a little wider world. So I think that's probably a good idea for young comics, to just read and try to pull something out of it. And the other thing too is you don't always have to be thinking about writing jokes. If you're like, sometimes when I can't get a joke out of a topic and I have to, I'll just start writing it like I'm writing an essay in grade 12, you know. What do I know about Harper's Accountability Act, you know? And then I just start writing about it, everything that I heard or read about it, look up on the internet. We've got the internet, you know, and just write up. And I've got about a 3-page essay written on just explaining what it is.
Without jokes.
Without any joke. And then all of a sudden jokes just start to appear. and then you condense that down, and you've got 3 jokes, 15 seconds worth of something that's taken you but you've got to just get all of this stuff out, and so there is a discipline involved in that. If you sit down and say, okay, I'm just going to write jokes, okay, accountability act. I can't think of any. But if you don't worry about the jokes, you just trust your inner comedian and just write it like your teacher in grade 12 told you to write an essay explaining what the accountability act was, or whatever it is that you want to write.
That's good advice. I would say that it's maybe labor intensive, and maybe that's why more people don't do it.
Yeah, it's harder. It's hard to do. It's hard to do when you're a comedian, because you're not being paid to do that, right? It's not a job where somebody's paying you a certain amount to write. Indirectly, they are. They're paying you the funnier you are and all that stuff on stage. But it's really hard to do that when technically. There's no office. There's nobody telling you to do that. There's no pressure that you're working under. There's no deadline. It's really hard to, and it's the type of job that ideally requires a lot of self-discipline. It's being practiced by a lot of guys who don't have self-discipline, who are just always been funny guys, and got kicked out of class more often for joking around than.
That's why they never wrote the essays when they were in grade 12, so they can't.
So, yeah.
Some comics get by on the strength of their personality. Irwin Barker, I always thought, got by despite his personality. He didn't exactly exude charisma, but the man could win over absolutely any crowd on the strength of his writing. It's something he was conscious of, too.
Yeah, when I first started doing comedy, it was really more... It was comedy on the page kind of stuff. You could close your eyes and listen to it, and you'd get the same out of it. So my delivery wasn't very good. That's what I was saying.
Okay.
And I had to work on that. That's what I had to work on most deliberately. The writing seemed to come fairly naturally, but the delivery was something that I always have had to work on and still do.
You still do. How do you work on it? Just by doing lots of sets over and over again?
Yeah, and just by telling myself before the set, I want to put some expression into it. I want to, just stand there and talk. Try to just create some energy for them. I'm not an energetic person. I don't jump all over the stage.
Were you a funny guy off stage back when you were working with Ipsos Reid and in the office or the classroom? Were people saying, "Hey, Irwin, you're funny. You should go on stage"?
Yeah, I guess I always had a good sense of humor, dry wit.
Yeah.
So it wasn't so much that I was like an office clown, because those are extroverted types of people. I'm more of an introvert. I'd always be invited to be the MC at somebody's wedding, or come up and make some kind of toast or whatever at an anniversary or wedding, or not so much funerals, but to do those sorts of things. And so when I started trying to do stand-up comedy, it seemed to work out fairly naturally. Although it was different because you don't have the same supportive crowd. It's not a whole bunch of people who you know and who know that you're kind of a funny guy. It's just a whole bunch of people staring at you, with their arms folded, wondering.
And then that's why a good, strong opening to set them at ease, especially if you just followed a young, energetic guy, is very important.
You can do that.
You were part of that at the Vancouver Comedy Festival. You were part of that horrendous show at the Vogue with the Trailer Park Boys.
Yeah. I was first up.
You were first up in the second show.
Yeah.
And you obviously heard how the first one went, and for those who don't know, the audience was there. The audience there was just there to see the Trailer Park Boys, and there was these tons of other great comics on the bill. But when they came out, they weren't really interested in those guys, and you had to come out first. Were you a little wary about going out there?
Yeah. My opening line, I walked out and I said, "Boy, am I ever glad I wore a suit." It took me a couple of minutes. I got the crowd, though.
You
right
did.
away.
Yeah, you did.
And because I had to bite the bullet or put my back on the barbed wire, as Jamie Hutchison says. You got to do that sacrifice and then, trailblaze. so the rest of the people on can have a good show. But we had to really radically change gears from the Trailer Park Boys. Yeah.
Yeah, but that's just it. Your comedy works to numerous, not only the academic set, but also a Trailer Park Boys crowd will sit there and go, wait a second, this guy's actually really funny.
You got to instantly read the. I'm reading Blink. You know the book Blink?
No.
Oh, it's about flash decisions that we make, and it's like that. You read the crowd right away, and you can see comics who haven't been doing it long enough can't do that yet. You know, I'm not the only one that can.
They just plow ahead doing whatever they were.
Yeah, whatever they had planned ahead
right.
to do, and you know, they can't move with the situation. But yeah, there's a lot of comics who can walk out there and they know instantly what to do.
Now, Irwin, you are a man in your 50s.
Yeah. Oh man.
And you come to these clubs, a lot of young people, a lot of hotties, a lot of people drinking. And is there a obstacle just as soon as you step out that you have to face?
I think there would be if I was pretending I was one of them, but I think I acknowledge right away that I'm not trying to be anything different than I am. I do joke something about walking in and when it's real young and saying, man, I feel like the dad in the rec room here all of a sudden coming downstairs and catching everyone drinking, like, what's going on? You know, that kind of thing. I let them feel comfortable with that I can be like their math teacher or their something like that, you know, without, so they're okay with it, you know. I think that what the younger kind of crowd resists is somebody my age coming in and pretending they're hip and cool and hey cats, you know, that kind of guy. Trying to be 20 when you're 50, you know, It doesn't work.
No, it doesn't. And they don't say, hey, cats anymore, which just proves their point right there.
Okay. I was sure that was it. They don't say fuzz either for the police now. It's just, the world has changed.
Irwin imparted his knowledge on young comics across the country without imposing it. But he never taught comedy. Although he was always putting down his thoughts on humor for a scholarly tome he never completed, he wasn't a fan of comedy classes.
Yeah, you know, you see these classes, people often taking classes from people who aren't funny anyway. But
those who do, whatever.
I don't know.
See, I can't tell a joke.
But there's certain things that people can learn. You know, you can talk a little bit about, okay, here's how you should hold the microphone and
little technique.
Here's how you should, you know, deliver your setup and your punchline over to the other side of the crowd, and you know, move around and you know, make gestures that are a little bit meaningful. And there's things that people can be taught. But then the other thing is, I've seen comics, amateurs go up who look too taut, if that makes any sense. It looks like they're doing it into a mirror, and their gestures are really forced, and the delivery looks like it's very practiced, you know. And if something happened in the room that you know, a plate of glasses spilled or something like that, it would throw them off completely, and they'd have to back up and start their sentence at the beginning again, or you know, it's just too rehearsed.
Right.
And they lose a bit of that. And how to develop, it's really hard to teach anybody that kind of, you know, natural thing. I've been writing notes and keeping a journal about it together. Part of it is because my background is in sociology, social psychology. And I did my graduate work in that, and then I went on to do comedy. And now I'm at a point in my life where I want to bring those two things together.
Right,
know?
Just like on the stage, right?
I want to bring them together.
Right.
I think that I have something to contribute. Now, I've read a lot of books about humor, and most of them define humor in terms of what it does. You know, it releases tension. It gives us a sense of mastery over situations that we wouldn't. It reduces roll distance. You know, it helps us think more creative. All of those things are functional definitions of humor, but they're not substantive. They don't tell us what humor is in its essence. And so what I've been trying to work on is to see if there's anything about humor that's why has humor emerged as a constituent part of being human. You know, what is it about our nature? And part of it is in that need that we have to continually create order out of the world that's around us. And in the process of creating that order, we come up with hidden similarities, and we come up with different ways of looking at the world. A lot of comedians don't exactly know why something's funny. They just know that it is. And in
A lot of people, I would say, not just comedians.
yeah, it's a bit like love, humor. That it's
And
very
pornography.
and
You know it when you see it.
you know it when you see it. It's very difficult to define, and we know it experientially. That's the similarity between humor and love. We know it by experiencing it. We find it just very difficult to define, other than saying that it's a feeling that we have. But yet, why is it such an important part of being human, and why? And part of that is that being human, we have this kind of a mind that's able to create a state of things that doesn't exist, and compare it with the reality that is, and create the ideal real gap, and experience frustration and guilt and disappointment and all of those things. We have to have some way of handling that. Religion traditionally did that for people. It's eroded now, so the comedians are the secular clergy. We're trying to help people make sense out of the world by letting them realize it's okay to laugh at it.
Yeah. So, I mean, but you hear things like puns are the lowest form of humor.
Structured jokes actually are the lowest form of humor.
Like
set
what?
up an interaction to say, okay, have you heard the one about, two priests walk into a bar, etc.? That's the lowest form of humor, because it's set up as a structured joke. So I don't know. That's always been my
The expectation is there, like you're waiting. Hell, we know a punchline's
in
coming.
interaction. Yeah, we announce interactionally that a joke is about to be told by saying, "Have you heard this one? Mm-hmm. Stop me if you've heard this one, or have you heard the one about?" And then you tell the joke, and so it's a concocted social arrangement for telling a joke. So that, to me, that's the most basic form of humor. So that's its lowest form. Puns, puns, interesting thing. Puns do to language what pies do to faces. I guess they turn meaning around on a little acoustical note.
Yeah, I guess it depends on the pun and the level of it, right?
Yeah.
And it reminds me of, I was going to ask you a question. Are there hack premises or just hack comedians?
That's a good question. There's both.
There are, and the reason why I ask you is because you've made me realize that they're just hack comedians, not hack premises. Because you do some premises that a lot of comics do. I hear now, Costco. Oh, you do great bits on Costco. And the thing is, they're hilarious when you do them.
Yeah.
You do a thing on airport security.
Airport security. So there's common premises.
Common, but there's some that are so common, when you hear a comic starting it, you're automatically going, oh, no, not this.
It's hack if they're not going to go anywhere with it, or they're not.
That's
gonna
what
do
I mean.
anything
So, but
different
that's
with
the
it.
comic himself or herself that is the problem, not so much the subject matter.
Yeah, I mean,
Do you
there's
agree
a
with
lot
that?
of there's a limited amount of subject matter
That's true.
that's
Yeah.
there.
So it's what you can do with it, and it doesn't matter if you're talking. Well, I mean, we just heard Eddie Murphy doing a Bill Cosby impersonation.
Yeah.
Now, some would say, "Don't do Jack Nicholson, don't do Bill Cosby," right?
Yeah.
And automatically discount it if someone's doing that. But his was in context and arguably funny. I don't know if you thought it was or not, but
The impression violates the integrity of individual difference, so it's humorous in that sense. That's
what? What did he just say, Kevin?
it means we expect each person to be individual, and when somebody looks like and acts like or talks like somebody recognizable, then it's an incongruence.
How long do you give a comic before you go, all right, enough, go away now? Like, obviously, when somebody's just trying it, you can go, well, they're not there yet. But they have
They could
potential.
be, yeah, you can see potential sometimes. Sometimes it's attitude, when they start having the big shoes attitude. When am I going to headline attitude, when they've been up twice? Or when they've been up twice and they use lines like, as a comedian, I can't help noticing things. And I was at customs the other day, and the guy asked me if I had anything to declare. And as a comedian, couldn't resist telling him to take a hike or whatever they say. It's always no, they're not a comedian yet,
When do you become a comedian?
Man, I guess when you're making a living out of it and getting paid or done something that recognizes you. That's one of the problems, I think, with the profession is that there's no piece of paper that anybody can have on their wall that says, certified, class 3 comedian. You just don't
Well,
have
there
that.
is, but they're taught by the people who aren't funny.
Yeah.
So, but do you, when you see, and I've seen you out at Jupiter and somebody's on, and you're diplomatic, but I could see you just shaking your head going, no, this is not going to work. This is never going to work. So how long will you give them before you go, they don't have it? Or can you see that right away?
You can see it. Well, you can see it after a little while that they're just not going to make it, and they're not going to be around that much longer. You know that too. And some people, they stick with it, and they get better and better. And some people, you see, Johnny Bueller. I saw him when he first started. I knew he was going to do well, and the same with Kevin Fox. And that's just a couple of examples of guys who right away. Erica Sigurdsson as well. First time I saw her when she was just starting, and I knew she was going to do really well.
Even though they might not have done as well on that particular night, but there was something.
No, you can tell they've got something. Yeah.
Every comedian and every Irwin Barker fan can recite verbatim their favorite Barker bits. Here's the backstory on a couple of his classics.
We'd submit like tons and tons of jokes when I was at This Hour is 22 Minutes, and only a handful of them can get on the show or get read by somebody at the desk. And so every once in a while, if I had a joke that was rejected like that, and I thought it was really good for my stand-up, I'd take it, I'd fix it up a little bit, I'd Irwinize it, because you got to write the joke for the person saying it. So I'd switch it back and make it my own joke. Mm-hmm. That's where the joke about dyslexia, my cousin being dyslexic. Yeah. And that's what I say. I don't want to make fun of dyslexics because they get all offended. All right, that's it. Get me a mirror. I'm writing a letter. And then there'll be trouble with a capital E, and that came out of jokes that just didn't make the show for some reason. I had submitted when I was with 22 a very similar kind of joke, and then it didn't get on.
It was too funny for 22 minutes, Irwin.
No. It was just, I wouldn't say that. I made it different than I'd submitted it, but.
Another question I have to ask you about one of your classic bits about the BC ferries. Does it really, I'm from Victoria. I travel the ferries all the time, and I keep forgetting to check, about the lifeboats and whether it really does say that.
Well, yeah, I wrote it down. There was like three steps. Yeah, raise valise and release bowsing line. That was the second step, after remove handrail. So
it really says that.
Yeah, raise valise and release bowsing line. So they're assuming that we know what a valise and a bowsing line are. And the other side of that I never really got to, but there is this there, is the whole who is this for? Because if you work there, you should know how to get the life raft out of the water right away. You shouldn't have to be sort of, what a bowsing line and a valise is, and the slew davit outboard is the other line, because I say I don't know what any of those words mean by themselves, let alone, just they could be thrown in any order, it wouldn't matter. Mm-hmm. But if you work there on the ship, then you would know what those terms meant, but ostensibly you would also know how to get the life raft out of the water without having to read the instructions. Yeah. So the instructions are for no one, because the language of the instructions is for people who are familiar with nautical terminology, who would already know how to get the life raft down, or it's for people like us who have no, there's not even a picture of what a bowsing line looks like, or
So your line is get me a nautical thesaurus.
We need a nautical thesaurus here right away, quickly, before we plunge to our icy death.
Well, it was fine. We took the ferry over. Have you been over? That was a trip and a half, the BC ferries. You get that? Welcome aboard BC Ferries. Please enjoy our many amenities. These include elevators, washrooms. Like, who's enjoying the washroom? Get them out of there. Carpeted flooring, padded seats with armrests, heated coffee in decorative mugs, see-through windows, flotation. All right, I get it. Buckle up, we're in for the ride of our lives. Hey, seriously, if you go on the BC ferries, check outside where they have the life rafts, the instructions. It says, in case of emergency, step one, it says, step one, remove handrail. Anyone here have a class 1 welder's license before we plunge to our icy death? Step 2 says, raise, valise, and swing davit outboard. Okay, we're going to need a nautical thesaurus here. Step 4 is like shiver me timbers. Every announcement's in their terms. If the freeboard touches the waterline, please ensure the scuppers are not plugged. Have a safe and enjoyable voyage. They call it a voyage. We're going to Victoria. You know, in 1792, maybe that was a voyage, but no. A voyage? What, we're going to get boarded by pirates? Sorry, hand over your decorative mugs. Often I'm on my way to Victoria. Oh, I'm going to Victoria. I hope I don't get scurvy. The white spot people throw a lemon in my Caesar salad. Well. That's an interesting way to travel.
In the summer of 2007, Irwin Barker was diagnosed with terminal cancer and given 1 year to live. 1 year later, he was back in Vancouver headlining Yuck Yucks. And that's when I spoke to him on this program, and he talked about living with the disease both personally and professionally. Everyone's asking you about your cancer since you've had it. Did you get tired of talking about it?
No, there's certain types of questions you maybe get tired of. I don't know if people understand the seriousness of it, and so I don't always get into really serious discussions with people. I tend to be, people will say, come on, well, Irwin, you'll pull out of this, you'll do well. And I go, yeah, okay, I will. Yeah, thanks, that kind of stuff. I'm not going to get into a serious discussion with someone I hardly know about, well, unfortunately, it's terminal. They don't think, I'm going to make it that much longer and all this kind of stuff. I don't really know. I could hang on for a while, and, but the whole difficult part is trying to be positive and realistic at the same time, because the realistic side of it isn't all that positive.
Yes,
so it's tough to get that balance. But there are the future has things like experimental procedures and all of that kind of stuff. So it's not over yet.
I saw you in September. You played Balthazar's.
Oh, yeah.
And you had material on your cancer, but since then you don't do it. Or maybe I just haven't seen it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, what I found is that if I'm at a club, I don't think I want to bring them down to that level of talking about cancer, and it's very, very difficult to pull yourself out of that. In a club where there's other comics on the show, it doesn't seem fair to them to be bringing it right down to cancer and then trying to pull out of a skid. So I've saved the cancer jokes and talk for when I'm doing some kind of function that's specifically committed to cancer fundraising. I've been able to do a few of those kinds of shows where we're raising money for. We did one just recently for Princess Margaret Hospital, which is the hospital looking after me, and so in that venue, being able to talk about cancer once in a while, I might, but it just doesn't seem like the type of thing that's appropriate to bring up, And the same with like an after dinner thing at a conference or whatever. They just want to have some fun and joke around, and I think if I was through the cancer, let's say if I was past it already, and I was able to say, so I had been diagnosed with cancer and went through the chemo, and now the tumors are gone and the doctor's given me a clean bill of health. There's a happy ending and people can kind of applaud, oh good, and then you can do some jokes about cancer then. But I think when you're in the middle of it and still really threatened by it, it's pretty hard to make people comfortable with you joking about it.
Would you get a different kind of laugh, do you think, after that?
Yeah, when you're going through it, it's kind of uncomfortable. They're not quite sure if they should laugh or not. But then when I was doing at the cancer fundraiser for Princess Margaret, the laughs were great. They were huge, and it's all because that was permission to talk about cancer, and I was talking not just about joking about cancer, but also about how the experience of cancer was interfering or crossing with or the experience of comedy, and saying my goal in comedy has not been to do jokes about cancer, but to do jokes in spite of the cancer, and to let the world know and cancer know that it can't penetrate your spirit, where your creativity comes down. The cancer can't touch all of that. It's in my case, it's the sense of humor and the ability to write jokes. Other people, it could be poetry or music and whatever creative gift that you have. The cancer is not going to touch that. It's a physical thing, not something that comes and steals what's within your spirit, unless you let it do that.
Unless you let it.
Yeah.
To paraphrase Irwin, cancer took his body, but his spirit and his jokes will live on. So long, Irwin. We'll miss you.